Icon Series is a golf tournament, but it is played by non-golfers, played by iconic athletes. On the world side, Batistuta, Bale, Zola, legends of the football game who love golf.
Hello and welcome to the Sports Pundit podcast, the show for people shaping the future of sport. Driven by my curiosity working in the industry, I've brought together leading executives to host conversations with decision makers across innovation, marketing, media, finance and performance, unpacking their strategies and industry-shaping ideas.
Hello and welcome along to another episode of the Sports Pundit Media Podcast. I'm Joe Redfern and you are?
Michael Cohen. Great to be here today.
Great. Well, we are thrilled today to be joined by Chris Sice, who is Chief Content Officer at Icon Series. And we've got loads to dig into, given that they've just recently run their latest Icon Series event in Thailand. So welcome. Thanks for joining us, Chris.
Great to be here. Great to be here, guys.
Brilliant. Right. Listen, we're going to kick off with the origin story, as ever, in any good podcast. Icons. Tell us a little bit about Icons. Obviously, it's positioned itself to be pretty disruptive, and indeed it is in this space. Now you're just off the back of the recent event that's happened. Tell me, are you still considering it disruptive? What has proved or disproved the original thesis behind Icons?
Well, shall I just give a quick intro? Icon Series,
Absolutely.
What it is, what it does. So essentially, Icon Series is a golf tournament, but it is played by non-golfers, played by, as we describe, iconic athletes. There have been half a dozen of these done before, the majority of which have been using athletes from all sports. So, the previous one in New York had Ash Barty, Michael Phelps, Canelo, Alvarez, Pep Guardiola, Harry Kane, Brian Lara, a mix of every sport. A lot of NFL players and NBA players that I'm not as familiar with, but I'm told are huge out there. But all united by love of golf and generally are incredibly good golfers. So you might be scratched to 5. It's quite rare that somebody's got a higher handicap. Two teams, Team World versus, can be Team Europe or Team England. And it is team match play. The event that we've just done in Bangkok was a football edition. And it was 24 footballers. On the English side, you had players like John Terry, Joe Hart, Theo Walcott. On the world side, Batistuta, Bale, Zola, Ramsey, legends of the football game who love the golf. And, with someone like Bale, they're scratch handicap, great golfers.
Yeah, not so, bad golfer either, yeah.
So just as a bit of an introduction, that's the concept. Coming to your question, actually, is it disruptive and why is it disruptive? I'd probably say, it might be a long answer, but there's probably 3 areas that we look at that we look to do differently, that bringing that together as a product makes it different. That would probably be the golf format itself, the sports entertainment production, and the last part, audience participation. So on the golf side, if you watch, a standard golf tournament, there will be 4 days of 18 holes of golf. And some might say it's relatively pedestrian. This is 4 sessions, but they're 10 holes of golf and it's played over 2 days. Team match play, so it is a little bit like Ryder Cup. Yeah. And then you have the intrigue of watching professionals who aren't familiar with playing golf. So there's a certain curiosity to watch these guys. But then we interject a few format points. So we will use things, there's a few points, call the captain, where, these athletes are able to call on a pro golf captain. And in this instance, ex-Ryder Cup captain Thomas Bjorn was the captain of the world team. Danny Willett was captain of the England team. And once per session, you could call on those guys if you're in trouble to then come and play a shot for you. There's home and away holes and the final hole that are worth double points. Yeah. And if you watch, often if you see match play events, by the time you get to the 15th or 16th hole, a lot of those matches are almost finished. Somebody might be 3 up. So we provide double points on those holes to create a bit of extra jeopardy. I admit, actually, the idea came from international ping pong. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but a little bit different to table tennis. 15 points you need to get to. But at one stage during the match, the orange ball can be played. And the orange ball is worth 2 points. And I went with my son years ago, and they turn the lights on and off. And there's a little bit of drama that comes in. And actually, it suddenly feels special. They definitely provide a bit of inspiration.
Was it designed like that from the beginning, or have these tweaks been made as Icon Series has evolved?
No, we introduced, actually, the fast format, I think, has always been the case.
Yeah.
I came on board for the last Icons of Football, and we introduced a few of these ideas, and you test them out. You see whether these things work. So, we tested out a few last time, and most of them, we felt worked. And I think really importantly, we feel at least enhance the sport rather than cheapen it or denigrate it in some way. So there's a few format points. There's a $10 million swing. You get a hole in one. The player earns, actually earns a third of that. A third can go to an audience member who's voted, again, just drawing the audience in and providing a sort of spike of interest. So there's a number of golf format points. From a production point of view, we talk about, very much create sports entertainment and try and get the mix of, both high quality golf production, which is pretty complex to produce. So we've got great golf producers, but then we'll bring in entertainment producers to work with them and look to create something that's a little bit more dynamic. So if you watch a standard golf tournament, they'll have a pretty staged studio that they'll go back to with 2 people around a coffee table talking about golf. Actually, we put the players' bar in a large studio area. So, the players are a part of this, and it'd be wrong to say it's a bit TFI Friday-like, but there's much more of a vibrant feel around the studio. And then we'll bring in, we have Josh Denzel comes in, a presenter next to, famed golf presenter Nick Doherty. And he brings a different energy. And
hey, Chris, I just want to pause there because I think the entertainment aspect that you're talking about, definitely showed up in a big way this last time, right? Whether it's the drone video, whether it was the loser lounge. Love to know some sort of thoughts around how you pulled from, entertainment and brought that, into that you guys just did.
Yeah, I mean, we look to make sure that entertainment is right at the heart of it. So, we will invest in quite a lot more VTs than you might do normally around this, that just bring a bit of color around this. And whether it's, we created a drone video that felt a little possibly over ambitious at the time in trying to get every player and captain and presenter on board.
It was quality.
It was awesome.
With a fly through that we wondered whether we'd actually capture it, but actually that's fun. And when there's cameo appearances, there's little cultural reference points, to me, I watched that, and I even myself, I watched it again and see David Janela doing his hair and see the players playing along. And those sorts of things are fun. They provide a different edge, and I think you need a balance. Golf, I love golf, but I can't watch too much of it, and I need to punctuate that with a bit of entertainment. But I think around it, we're very aware of the type of golf event it is. It's a serious golf event, but there is an ability through these VTs to humanize the players. And actually, when you look at the players, if you ask them about football, a lot of the time you can see the shutters coming down and they give a standard answer without thinking that they've done over 20 years. Ask them about golf and their eyes light up and they talk in an incredibly relatable, humanizing way. And you hear them talk in ways you wouldn't have heard otherwise. I hear Theo Walcott talk and say, the last one, Figo's his hero, and he's nervous about going out and playing against him. You'd never hear that sort of stuff otherwise. So some of the VTs that come around this and the sense of trying to just get under the skin of these players in a fun way, for me, that complements the golf coverage. And if you have the balance of that, then actually you're giving your audience many different reasons to want to stay with the piece. It just gets the core.
It's interesting you pulled on that these are serious, this is a serious event. These are serious golfers. And I think you frame the hook here as like elite athletes that, can switch sports, win and be competitive. How has the audience response been to that? Like, does the audience look at it as, you've used the word entertainment, sometimes sport and entertainment can come off as a novelty rather than a serious competition. Like, how have you seen this play out for the audience, both in person, but also, as you're thinking about it on, from a distribution standpoint, people tuning in, watching it?
It's interesting. I think people come in curious. People come in and they're interested in, actually, okay, let me see John Terra, Gareth Bale and see if he's any good. My belief is that people come in and they expect this to be a hit and giggle, sort of an exhibition, because that's all they've seen before. We've seen a lot of these. You'll see, Piers Morgan and Michael McIntyre, red-faced, guffawing and laughing. And it doesn't really matter. They're having a great time. It's a pro-am. Actually, I think people come into this, it could be wrong, but with a certain expectation. And then when they see it, and see, actually, the quality of golf, is genuinely is compelling. But actually, the fact that it's relatable golf, then I think people are hooked. But I think they come with a perception. We then need to carry them on the journey so they find this truly entertaining. And, I know, we're just pulling in all the data at the moment. I know last year, it's like a 29-minute average watch time, and to me, particularly coming from a TV perspective, that seemed wrong. That seemed too high, really. And I think when we look at some of the stats that I see coming in, actually, you've got an audience that you start to hook. And particularly being able to see, we had a broadcast stream and we had a YouTube stream, and actually seeing the numbers of interactions, to me, they're all evidence that point to an audience that are engaged with the product.
So on that piece, you talked about, you had a broadcast stream, you had a YouTube stream. Like, talk a little bit about that hybrid strategy and how you guys think about the audiences and the strategy behind that.
Broadcast is key. Broadcast provides legitimacy. That is incredibly important for our partners, for commercial partners. It provides reach. It hits an older demographic who are into golf. It's also really valuable. I'd say for commercial partners, when you look at the media valuation that comes back, you got much higher CPMs that are coming through from broadcast, and it'll go out and over the equivalents of Sky in over 200 countries. So there's a great broadcast part to that. Personally, for me, where this really comes to life is through the YouTube stream. And actually the opportunity for audiences to lean forward, to get involved, and actually their involvement also helps shape the broadcast. So things like encouraging people to vote, having the chance to then, as you watch Bale v Bullard, and that is the equivalent of Scheffler versus Rory in the Ryder Cup. But actually, you can use that audience vote to then be able to say on the first tee as they go out, Jimmy, 66% of the audience are saying they think you're going to win. And you're able to spark a little bit of banter on the first tee. But if I've made the effort to vote, I'm also quite interested to see if I'm right.
Yes,
and,
cool.
That's where I think it becomes really interesting. And the ability to make sure what you're adding really enhances what you're watching. My background many a year ago, I worked at MTV and originally came in as head of digital, did a lot of interactive TV work. And it was interesting in trying to do some things that were additive to the broadcast. Some things were a novelty. You try some things, you think, actually, if I look at that back, that sounds good, but it's not making the broadcast better. It's just a bit of a gimmick. And they're definitely guilty of some of those things. I enjoy, we work with a business called Display who lead on our audience participation features. What I like in particular about those guys is it's not just, creating the graphics and everything else that comes around it. Is editorially, they have a very good eye to work very closely with a live producer to be able to say, okay, here's how we can add with, some fun elements or elements that just make the broadcast better. So I like the fact that those can work hand in hand, and I think it's interesting, we all talk a bit about sport as entertainment, and there's a lot of, I think sometimes the entertainment part is seen to cheapen the perception of sport.
Yes, I'd agree.
And it can do, and that tightrope walk, as I call it, I think is fascinating to just be able to navigate this, make it much more interesting for the viewer, for the audience at home. But make sure what you add actually just doesn't cheapen things and give it away.
I think that's the key, isn't it? And as you say, it's a tightrope walk, because what you want to do is provide value that is additive or, as you said, features that then deepen or lengthen the engagement that don't get in the way of what they're there to watch, is some footballers who happen to be very good at playing golf. And actually, that's harder to get right than it seems. To your point, I think sometimes people pull all the technological levers and gimmicks and bells and whistles, and ultimately it doesn't add anything, and it can become a distraction and a turnoff. So that balance is really interesting. The other thing that I wanted to mention, just as I was looking into kind of doing the prep for this, was obviously you've got your broadcast partners, you've got the streaming, and you've got the YouTube stream that went out to lots of different creators. I saw a couple of Thai creators that were in their studio doing their commentary over it. But you also partnered with Story 10, who helped you create all of the stories, the kind of the news feeding out. Just tell us a little bit about that, because that's also a really important part of how you reach and engage a much broader audience.
Yeah, I mean, for us, Icons is a challenger brand. It's building its brand, it's building awareness of its brand. So our distribution partners are key. So whether you're working with classic broadcast partners or whether you're working with partners who need essentially news created in the right manner that they can then cut and use in the simplest of ways, essentially, be wrong, I hate to use the word sort of a factory, but actually there's an editing unit that is looking to create different formats for different platforms. And then, really importantly for us, distribution is, I've had too many people talk about the creative, the distribution part is the killer part, and actually we had, I think it was 25 digital partnerships. There was maybe 10 creator watch-alongs that we had, more in Thailand and a certain amount in the UK. And then actually the real killer lever is players. The players love this. And where we moved from last year, maybe we had 2 or 3 collabs on post. We did, I think there was over 100 collabs that came a part of this, with players loving this and wanting to tap into their audience. And if you look at, Gareth Bale has over 50 million Insta followers. So actually create the right content that shows him in a brilliant light, package that up and make that available fast when it's timely and relevant. And actually the players aren't just turning up as participants, they're also another outlet, distribution outlet for us. But I think really importantly, there's an exchange of value. We're making them look great, relevant, and they're showing their best sides. That I think delivers value for everybody in the process, and that's where we look to work pretty hard from that point of view.
This podcast is produced by O6, but more than just being a production partner, they're also active members of the Sports Pundit community. Having seen the work they're doing across the industry up close, working with leading F1 teams and Premier League clubs, as well as top creators, I'm so delighted to now have them on board and helping to elevate this show to a new level.
And there's a distinction, as you said, between very often in their professional careers, they were duty bound to show up and do this talking head and that interview. But actually now they're doing something about which they're passionate. It's a hobby, albeit one that they're very good at. That's the difference between actually they want to share. This is something that like, oh, I'm loving this experience. I want to share this with my followers. And it's something that they don't feel is their duty. Actually, it's something that they're willing to share, which I think is, and that comes across.
Yeah, I think that was possibly one of the most, I would say, surprising things. But there's a lot of work I've done over the years with talent, and quite a lot that I've done with commercial partners, with brands. They've got 30 minutes with an F1 driver. They rock up, somebody's standing beside you with a stopwatch. You know, they turn up. It feels like a hostage video where they're saying what they need to be saying, but they don't want to be there. You can see it. And it is really noticeable. They love this. If you create something, you know, I mean, many a year ago, you know, for a while I did run MTV's development unit, and we would come up with, you know, great ideas. They'd sound fantastic on paper, but actually we didn't have the talent to buy in. Their eyes wouldn't light up, and actually you couldn't get it away. If you worked with them on what they were interested in, what they were passionate about, and shaped that into a format that worked, then you had a chance of getting gold. And, you know, you really notice with the players, you know, you see a Gareth Bale and he is incredibly animated. You know, talk to him sort of about golf around this, and, you know, he utterly comes to life. And you might not see that in the same way in other areas. So that's one of the areas we're lucky. You know, they love the feeling that comes around this event. You know, and a lot of that, you know, it's quite interesting how these things sort of form. Is, you know, the guy at the heart of this used to be a talent manager, utterly understands talent. And if, you know, there's two words that you hear across any of the content team throughout, it's player experience. We're not milking everyone just to get as much content as we can. If we don't feel it's working for them, it's a back off and give the guys space, work around it, and make sure it's an incredible experience. And I think if you can deliver that, there's a much greater chance that they're willing to give you more time, and, you know, their eyes light up when you interview them. So yeah, that's one great area.
It's fascinating. We were talking about all the storytelling, the intimacy, relatability, humanization. Like, these are all the sort of things you're saying. How have you thought about, you know, potentially doing a tape to live versus live? And, you know, would there be, you know, more benefits if you had more time in an edit, for more storylines, for longer release, or, you know, live, meaning you're there and it's got to go live. Just curious if you guys have thought about that.
It's interesting, you know, we just did a highlight show that we turned around incredibly quickly afterwards. And even we had debates afterwards in saying, do you know, if we had even more time to do this and storytell in a different way, more as an official film rather than more of a fast turnaround highlights, there's a lot more we might have done differently. So, you know, I think the nature of this works for the event in going live. You know, it certainly works for broadcast, and it gives you this spike of interest. I think it's quite interesting as a brand where you can take this. And if, you know, one of the things we're talking about is bottling athletes' passion for golf, that gives you different approaches you can take to storytell, different formats that you can create that are nothing about going live. And I think that's intriguing, really, in where we go as a brand over time. And I think it opens up brand extensions, but there's different approaches that you can take that are more than just a golf tournament. That I think are sort of there to take a breath and then work out what you prioritize next.
Yeah, and you see it even on your YouTube channel, right? The highlights of the Bale match at 30, I think it's 30 minutes, and super compelling, tight. I'm sure your retention on that is astronomical, and so you start to extrapolate that out. Like, what are the other opportunities with that, right? And it could be an and strategy. There's a live, and there's a tape to live aspect, right? To keep that brand story going.
It's exactly that, and that's a really good example where I find this area is so fascinating. Is working through how to create different formats that are, for example, that works for YouTube in a different way than us just taking the highlights of the TV show and then putting a couple of cameramen inside the ropes to capture a much more intimate approach and feel like you're on that journey. And it's interesting then seeing the watch times and how I think they'd be very different than if we just show the highlights of the broadcast stream and put that out on YouTube. And it's definitely not to say we are cracking that on every platform. I think it's creatively really interesting that the producer who made that, it's quite interesting from the outside, seeing him taking a little bit of TV, a lot of two smaller cameras capturing this, different audio and packaging this with all of those assets together into something unique. And there's a lot more opportunity for us to be able to do that. It's managing resource, really in just working through, okay, there's a lot of people producing, there's a lot of people editing, actually, where do you get the value? And, changing that around
the trick,
consistently.
Isn't it? There's slightly different skill sets in producing for TV and for YouTube, but there's the joy is trying to find that person who's got the lightning in a bottle, who can kind of think from both sides, because they're very different consumption patterns on different platforms. But with that in mind, and just going back to what you were saying about packaging highlights and packaging formats, obviously you're the other side of the live event itself now. What is that life of the content outside of the live event for you? Do you have a certain window that you're thinking is your kind of Goldilocks zone? Is it a couple of weeks afterwards, or do you just intend to try and keep it as fresh and engaging as long as possible?
I mean, the plan over time is that there will be 3 Icons series a year, 3 Icons events a year. So more events, more spikes to lead to, but actually, really it's for me, this is about creating formats, evergreen formats that run consistently around the events. And then we come back from Bangkok and there's an extraordinary amount of footage that we have that has got a long shelf life. And it's just working through the balance of not boring people with something that feels like it's gone and keeping these things fresh, where, there's a longest drive challenge as an example that we haven't put out that is interesting. It's fascinating to see the players take this on, and those things I think have got a life of their own. And then you'll have some, we had a clip with Pep Guardiola chipping in, and that does like 12 million views. So there's some of these things where there's big spikes that can come. But I think really importantly, not only being tethered to one event is really important. And I'm particularly interested in us developing more formats that work across the year, that are really a case of using the time you have with talent that's unique, because it's pretty rare that you can get that sort of time with, a Bale, or, they give us a fair amount of time. We went to Argentina and we had a sort of day and a half with Batistuta that personally was quite exciting, was magical for us to have. But you realise most people aren't getting that sort of time with them. So if you can create something unique that either reaffirms to a different audience why they're an icon, or that brings to life their passion, that's fascinating. And it's fresh, unique content when there is so much that's out there that can get lost. For me, it's actually having a unique angle that you really feel works for audiences, it's bottling that rather than necessarily doing a lot of the commodity stuff that everyone else is doing that you can get lost in. You know, it's not to say you don't do a bit of that, but it's finding that balance.
Yeah.
When you talk about formats and finding others, do you think that's within golf, or do you think there's other verticals where this could be applicable to?
You know, I think golf is going to be the heartland. So, you know, I think this area of that is our shtick, really, where you're unlocking, you know, talent's passion. But, you know, and I think that can stretch. That could stretch quite a lot as to what that is. So actually that's the starting point. And it may be you can stretch further from there. But I think knowing why people care about you and your brand and honing around that, at least first of all, is the key thing. You know, so that'll be our starting point.
You said that you're just gathering all of the data, and I'm sure there's a lot of it to work through. But is there anything that you saw either personally or in the data that you've had so far that really surprised you, that, you know, just something unexpected? I assume that there's many more casual fans that are tuning in because they've got an interest in whether those elite athletes can actually be good golfers, or they were fans of Batistuta as a player. Is there anything that surprised you?
You know, I mean, I think, you know, one of the things that we said we want to do is we want to bring a new audience to golf. You know, I think our aim is bringing casual golfers. Actually, if you look at the sort of the diagram of audience we're trying to hit, actually the classic golf fan might be slightly older, might be slightly male, and you know, we are definitely looking to bring a younger audience in that is definitely comes from a sort of casual sense. And it's definitely not an audience who watch the Dubai Desert Classic. It might be more of the audience that come in from wider sports to things like the Ryder Cup. So I find it quite affirming in knowing if you look at a standard golf audience on TV, I would say 2/3 of them will be over 55. You know, I could be wrong. You know, look at our audience, 2/3 of them are under 45. And, you know, that's a much more valuable audience, you know, for me, that it is affirming that I feel at least we're hitting the right audience. I think when I look at some of the stats around audience participation, you know, I mean, it might be a sweet spot for me, but that's why I get quite excited. And, you know, look at watch times. I mean, I'm just printing out something that Harry from Display sent me earlier. You know, I mean, you know, he's saying actually the interaction hub, you know, where you went in and actually you could start getting involved. 22,000 visitors in there, 18,000 visitors that have come from the broadcast QR code. This is a 50% click-through rate once you do go into that area. So, you know, for me, just getting, you know, small amounts of anecdotal evidence that people are leaning forward, for me, definitely makes me feel we're on the right track. You know, and have a belief, you know, certainly in just trying to present something that isn't standard, lean back golf, that when I can see some of those stats, whether they're surprising, but they feel affirming when you believe that this is the way the audiences want a product to work in 2026.
When you think about the audience and like they come for this event, they engage with the event, and they're going to engage with some content throughout the year, like what's the dream scenario for you for having a fan of this? Like, who is that fan? What are they doing? Like, what are they saying? How are they showing that fandom, right? Obviously, this isn't a traditional sort of league, if you will. How do you think about that?
A lot of the audience that we might look for, it isn't just age-wise. There's a sensibility that comes with this. But actually, I think it's really useful. We broadly said, you know, there's a producer, Sam, that we work with. He's incredibly creative. But actually, he said, you know what? You're not far off the target audience. You know, maybe he's coming in, he's early 30s, mid 30s. And we broadly say it's you know, it's the sort of, you know, perhaps a better putting Sam to a certain extent. But actually, making stuff that is culturally relevant that you are then sharing with your WhatsApp groups, that's creating a certain amount of talk about is key. To use a sort of, perhaps an anecdote, even though my son might be slightly younger than that, was when I started working with icons, he said to me, I'm watching this with some of my mates, and he said, why have I never heard of this before? He was almost offended. He said, this is actually really good. And then when I was in Thailand, it's quite rare that my son calls unless he wants some money. But he called me up and he said, all my mates are talking about it. It's all over the BBC. It's all over Sky. It's all over my feeds. And it's actually when there's a certain amount of cultural resonance that I feel we're then hitting that. And you're broadening from just the sort of golf ghetto into sports culture. Then I feel we're starting to hit the jackpot. And, I think the work that, our lead on social did actually this time, and just quality and volume, to me, took me aback. There's a lot that we were planning to do, but actually the array of content was impressive. And you could see, I joked I'd come back at the end of the day and I had a broad idea what we'd be doing. I would come back, I'd be exhausted, but I'd look at our Insta feed and I'd still be going 20 minutes later. So this is good. This, and there's a sense where I really needed to sleep. But I could see a range of that. The reason I say it is having the sort of content that gets talked about that is more than just golf swings is, I think, where you need to be. And as, you're just getting to sort of talk about the hope culturally. I think you're pressing the right buttons.
So if I take that and pull on it, right, this is all about how can we make icons, synonymous with cultural currency, if you will. Like, how does that, how does that play out in terms of like long-term value for what you're building, right? Does that play out in you're getting bigger rights fees? Does that play out in your, advertisers are spending more money? Like, how do you think like the goal is, of translating that sort of cultural currency into like a commercial outcome?
Yeah, I think it is for rights fees are not what they would be 10 years ago. So whilst rights fees are healthy and nice to have, they're not the lion's share of income. Really the play for this is tourism bodies, it is locations, it is brand partners. And actually, I'd particularly say, smart brand partners who understand branded entertainment. And, can see, actually this instance for Rainwood, they're these guys, they own Wentworth, they own the sort of, extraordinary location that we went to. They wanted to be put on the map. And we spoke to them and said, well, we looked at doing a Thai Open or, LPGA event, and that wouldn't have been seen or talked about that much. Actually, the sort of thing that we do with you and the ways in which we can showcase how amazing the place is creatively, with things like those drone videos and other means of inserting integrated messaging within that delivers a hell of a lot more value, and is why wherever we go with the next event, it's interesting some of the discussions you have with partners like an EA, one of the partners this time who get it, who understand content marketing, who understand branded entertainment and a different value that can come, and that's where there's much more interesting discussions than just an event sponsorship or just a media buy. That is fascinating and integrated with smart international brands.
I think that's becoming ever more important, isn't it? As ad loads increase on platforms, but the ability to screen them out, whether it's using ad blockers or even just screening them out mentally, it means so much more and it lands more if it's embedded natively within that content. And that's a real smart way to do it. Just before we wrap up, I wondered, is there any stories, any standout moments that you can share from the recent event that you can tell us about and not get sued for?
I think maybe there was definitely one moment that was slightly heart in mouth. In a few days beforehand, we were actually out with Jimmy Bullard and one of the creators, a guy called Matt Boucher, who's a trick shot creator.
Yeah.
He's an extraordinarily talented guy. And one of the things that we did, we went outside one of these incredible villas and we said, why don't you, shape a shot? It wasn't even on the golf course, but onto one of the holes. And Jimmy said, okay, well, the loser has to dive into the pool that's here. Which, I thought, okay, fantastic. They played their shot. This was quite impressive. Matt won. Jimmy said, okay, I'm going in the pool. So he just strips off, goes to jump in the pool. And actually, he dives in the pool. Great, Lars, fantastic. He gets out and he then goes to dive in again. But the water, but outside the pool, it's a little bit slippery. And as he goes in, he slips. And there was, 8 of us. And his slip, he looked like he was going to hit his head hard on the edge of the pool. I mean, it really, he must have been incredibly close to doing that. And as he did say, there was this sort of collective, sharp intake of breath where you just thought, oh no, man down. When those moments happen, you think this guy is not going to better play. He's going to crack his head open. And he just got away with it. And, as ever, Jimmy came out laughing, guffawing, about it. But yeah, thankfully he didn't injure himself and he could play in the event. But yes, quite a few tales, but that was certainly one that sticks with me. And thankfully he didn't injure himself.
Amazing. Well, listen, thank you very much for joining us. I feel like we could perhaps talk for another hour, and actually maybe we will do another follow-up after the next Icons series and see how the whole series is evolving. But thank you very much, Chris Sice, for joining us today. Thank you, Michael, for co-hosting.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate it.
Thank you for your time. Great to meet you, Michael. Joe, I'm sure we'll see each other soon.
Thank you for listening to the Sports Pundit podcast, kindly produced by the amazing team at 06. I'll include more information about the guests and the topics covered in the show notes. Head to sportspundit.co to find previous editions, access the newsletter, and to sign up for our WhatsApp group and see upcoming social events in cities around the world. See you again soon.